Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a kitchen that smells of burnt crust and spiced dreams. Picture this. You're standing beside a fire that's way too close to your face, a heavy wooden table in front of you, and a slab of dough that might be your only shot at not getting scolded by the head cook. There's flour in your hair, soot on your sleeves, and someone just dropped a bowl of eggs. Again. Welcome to the back rooms of a medieval manor's kitchen. Part battlefield, part bakery, and always chaotic. It's loud in here. Not industrial loud like a city bus or a blender full of ice, but medieval loud. Crackling logs, shouting apprentices, chickens clucking somewhere underfoot, and the ominous silence of the Lord's food taster who's just stopped chewing. And you're about to discover that what makes medieval pies truly magical isn't just butter, flour, and luck. It's the stories buried inside the crust. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're tuning in from and what time it is. I love seeing our little sleepy history club light up across the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pull your apron tighter. The head cook barks an order in Middle English that sounds suspiciously like, "Don't mess it up this time," and you glance down at the dough in front of you. It's not just dough, it's dinner, dessert, and dignity all rolled into one. The firelight glints off the copper pans. Something smells faintly sweet, like honey warming in a clay pot, but underneath that is the musk of lard and wet wool. Not exactly an Instagrammable kitchen. Here's the first thing to wrap your sleepy brain around. Pies in the medieval world weren't dessert. At least, not always. They were often savory, meaty, sometimes spiced with things that modern taste buds would classify as dessert ingredients. Think minced mutton with raisins, or eel baked with cinnamon and ginger. Yes, cinnamon on eel. Your mouth's confused just thinking about it. But cinnamon back then? That stuff was flex. Imported from distant lands, it came over on caravans and ships, guarded like royal treasure. It was so rare that nobles sometimes sprinkled it just to say, "I can." One spice merchant's notebook from the late 13th century lists cinnamon at triple the price of saffron, and saffron already cost more than some small plots of land. Basically, if you were rich, you didn't show it with a gold chain. You did it with pie spice. The woman next to you is mashing something with a pestle that smells like cloves and orange peel. You lean in, and she gives you a look like, "Mind your own mortar." She's making a filling, probably for one of the show-off pies that'll be served at the high table, stuffed with pigeon, apple, pepper, and a dash of something labeled powder deuce. No one quite agrees on what that meant, by the way. Historians still argue whether it was a standard spice mix like today's pumpkin spice, or just a vague label meaning whatever sweet-smelling stuff you've got left. Here's a wild fact to drift off with. Sometimes medieval cooks added sugar to savory pies just to fake you out. It wasn't dessert, it was deception. You'd bite in expecting honeyed fruit, and boom. Surprise! Pork and eggs. It's the Middle Ages version of a prank pie. And sugar? Forget your pantry stash. Medieval sugar came in rough, tan-colored cones called sugar loaves, and had to be chiseled apart like rock. Only the wealthiest kitchens had enough sugar to sweeten entire pies. Most people settled for honey or dried fruits for that hint of sweetness. You glance toward the back of the kitchen where the fire's hottest. A squat little oven, brick-lined and soot-scarred, holds the secrets of the day. A boy opens it with an iron hook, and the smell that hits you is something between Christmas and burning shoes. Overcooked again? The crusts on the pies were often thick, intentionally thick. They weren't meant to be eaten, they were like edible Tupperware, keeping the meat safe inside during long baking or storage. The French even had a word for them, coffins. Yes, that's real. Pies as coffins. It tracks. Meanwhile, the lord of the manor probably doesn't know, or care, that his dinner required crushing imported almonds, drying rose petals, and boiling figs in wine for 2 hours. His job is to recline in fur-trimmed robes, chew slowly, and say things like, "Not enough mace." Which is hilarious because mace, in this context, isn't a weapon. It's the dried outer layer of nutmeg, used to add a soft floral heat to baked goods. You're basically spicing with tree peels. As you prep a fresh batch of crust, this time mixing flour with a bit of rendered fat, you hear a tale from the woman across the bench. She's kneading dough like it owes her money and casually mentions the old legend of the sugar star. Supposedly there was once a pie so beautifully glazed with honey and powdered sugar that it sparkled like the heavens. It was baked for a wedding in Kent, and guests swore it had a shooting star inside. Probably just a blown egg filled with silver leaf. But hey, medieval Pinterest dreams are still dreams. She laughs, and her laugh sounds like old parchment crinkling. You're not sure if she's joking. She probably isn't. The kitchen's hot. Your arms are flour-streaked. Someone just dropped a sack of caraway seeds, and it's raining tiny, sharp smells. There's rhythm in the chaos, though. Wooden spoons clack, knives scrape, dough thuds against the table. You're not just baking, you're building history. One strange, spiced pastry at a time. Somewhere behind you, someone sings a little rhyme, while layering prunes into a tart. Clothes for the lover, mace for the fight, sweet is the pie that bakes through the night. You hum along even though you don't know the tune. There's magic in this kitchen. Not the wand-waving kind, but the kind that happens when you turn things from distant lands. Saffron from Persia, sugar from Cyprus, pepper from India, into something warm, flaky, and oddly satisfying. Outside, the manor's great hall is filling with laughter. Soon the pies will be served, one with a pastry crown molded on top, another shaped like a hedgehog for no reason except that the cook could. That one's your favorite, and it's got quince inside, mashed and spiced until it tastes like jam from a fairy tale. You sit back, the fire warming your face, the smell of nutmeg drifting under your nose. You've made it through the first round, and you didn't even burn the crust. One pie down, 14 to go. You wipe your hands on your apron, though at this point it's mostly symbolic. The flour's already claimed your sleeves, your hair, and a good bit of your soul. You reach for the thick, stiff dough resting on the board in front of you. It's not the kind of dough that makes flaky croissants or tender pastries. It's the kind of dough that could survive a catapult launch, and that's by design. See, in the medieval world, the pie crust wasn't always food. Sometimes it was pure architecture. A protective barrier between the wild world and whatever soft, squishy thing the cook had decided to shove inside. They called it a coffin, remember? And in many cases, they treated it exactly like one. A container, not a treat. You press down with your knuckles, the dough barely giving way. It's made from coarse flour, water, and beef drippings. Lard if you're lucky. Butter's too fancy for this kind of project. The result is dense, dry, and utterly inedible unless you're very hungry or extremely drunk. But here's the genius. These crusts were tough enough to hold their shape for hours, even days, and acted like medieval Tupperware. Travelers would carry meat pies wrapped in linen, letting the crust act as both preservation method and portable lunchbox. You wouldn't eat the shell, you'd toss it or give it to beggars, or more darkly, to prisoners. Yes, crusts from noble tables often ended up in dungeons. The rich ate the fillings, the poor gnawed on the leftovers. That's not a metaphor, that's Tuesday. Your arms ache from the kneading. Across the kitchen, a younger apprentice is making a mess of things, trying to roll out a crust while holding the pin like a sword. The head cook swoops in and corrects him with a thump to the back of the head, and a muttered prayer to Saint Honoré, patron saint of bakers. You whisper an apology to the dough. You're starting over. Here's where it gets fun. Crusts didn't just protect the pie, they also protected the eater. In an age when poison was a legitimate concern, especially for anyone above the social rank of field peasant, having a sealed pie was a minor act of self-defense. A good crust could be a guard against tampering. Think about it. If the seal is broken, you don't eat it. If it's intact, maybe you live to see dessert. Historians still argue whether noble kitchens really used elaborate pastry seals for security, or if that's just a romantic fantasy we've baked into the story. But some surviving recipe manuscripts mention stamping pies with the cook's unique crest. Sort of like signing your work, or marking it safe. You dust a bit of flour onto the board, and finally get the dough to cooperate. This time, you're making what's called a raised pie. That means no baking dish. You build the crust straight onto the table, shaping it up like walls of a fortress. The sides hold themselves up, just barely, until you fill it with chunks of pork, mushrooms, egg, and dried cherries. Add a dash of salt, some peppercorns, and a spoonful of verjuice, sour grape juice that adds a tart bite like vinegar. You pop a slice of apple in your mouth while you work, trying not to flinch when it bites back with cloves and long pepper. You forget how spicy things could get in medieval pies. Not spicy like jalapenos, but warming in a deep, mouth-tingling kind of way. It's the Middle Ages. Food is entertainment, and pies are the headliners. They also had another job, storytelling. You glance across the bench to a pie shaped like a castle, complete with pastry turrets and little crenellations. It's not just fancy, it's coded. If a pie looked like a fish, it probably was fish. If it looked like a bird, maybe duck or quail was inside. But if it looked like a mythical creature, well, that's either a statement of culinary bravado or a warning. Some pies had entire scenes baked into them. One 15th century recipe describes a pie with a cooked stag inside, its antlers gilded with gold leaf, its eyes replaced with cloves, and a little red flag stuck into its back. Was it delicious? Who knows? Was it dramatic? Absolutely. You brush the top crust with egg yolk and stamp it gently with a carved wooden press, a fleur-de-lis pattern borrowed from the Lord's coat of arms. It bakes into the golden top like a badge of honor. You glance around the kitchen. Most of these pies aren't even for eating right away. Some will be stored in cold rooms for days, the crust acting like a medieval fridge. Others are being baked for display at the feast, where they'll sit untouched, admired, then scraped clean for the servants. At the next table, a cook is preparing something you hadn't seen before, a pie with a removable lid. She calls it a trap pie. You ask, half joking, if it contains actual traps. She shrugs. Sometimes frogs. What? Apparently, in certain noble feasts, pies were used for performance. Live animals, frogs, birds, even squirrels, were placed inside a hollow pie crust with air holes. When the pie was cut, the creatures would leap out, causing gasps, laughter, or, in one legendary case, a mild heart attack. Ever heard the rhyme, 4 and 20 blackbirds baked in a pie? Yeah, not a metaphor. Historians still argue whether that rhyme reflects common practice or was a one-off stunt. But enough cookbooks reference the trick that it's clear. At least a few cooks like to play with their food. You imagine serving that to a banquet now. Surprise! It's not gluten-free. Also, it's alive. Back in the kitchen, the crusts are starting to brown. You pull your pie from the oven with heavy gloves, setting it down next to a tray of smaller pastries called chewits. They're tiny, handheld pies. Think of medieval Hot Pockets, but filled with spiced veal and currants. One version even has almonds mashed into a paste and layered under fish, which sounds terrible until you remember. This is a world without refrigeration, and anything that masks flavor is a bonus. You bite into a test one, nearly cracking a tooth. Still too hard. The cook shrugs. It'll soften by supper. You're not so sure. That crust could break a knight's helmet. Still, there's pride in it, even the inedible bits. There's a whole section of pie making that involves not eating. Pies as displays, pies as jokes, pies as puzzles. Later, someone will crack open a crust and find a small pouch inside. A message, a charm, a ring. The pastry was just the envelope. Somewhere in the manor, bells ring. calling people to wash and dress for the evening meal. The head cook gestures to the remaining pies, nods, and says something approving. You're not fluent in his accent, but the smile is universal. You stack the crust trimmings into a bowl for the pigs, wipe your hands again, and sneak one more bite of that ridiculous veal chew-it almond thing. It's weirdly good. The kitchen smells now of meat and spice, a hint of char, and something sweet baking at the far hearth. Probably the cook's favorite, a cherry and marrow tart. Yes, marrow from bones, a silky fat used like butter. You're not shocked anymore, you're just hungry and a little proud. You helped build a fortress, one that holds dinner, and a secret or two. The bells are still echoing when you step into the grand hall to deliver your pie. It's a massive room with stone walls that breathe cold, hung with faded tapestries, their threads worn but proud, scenes of hunting, battles, saints, and one rather unsettling image of a unicorn being cooked in a cauldron. Medieval taste and decor, much like their pies, veers sharply between wonder and, wait, what? You balance the raised pie on a pewter platter, its crust golden and hard like a knight's armor. It's heavy, and you're praying it doesn't slide off mid-step. The hall is buzzing with anticipation. Long oak tables stretching like rivers, nobles wrapped in velvet and fur, fingers heavy with rings, goblets of spiced wine already half drunk. Musicians are tuning their lutes, and someone is definitely laughing too loud for how early in the night it is. Then comes the hush. Not a total silence, just a dip in the noise, like the crowd drawing breath all at once. Because the next course is arriving, and it's not your pork pie with mushrooms. Oh no, that's solid, reliable, respectable. But this is the bird pie. You're not ready. 4 servants enter carrying what looks like a small table, but it's actually a colossal pie crust, roughly the size of a modern car tire, balanced carefully on a wooden tray. It's sealed tightly, glazed to a high sheen, and decorated with pastry leaves and tiny dough swans. Everyone watches. The musicians stop. Even the dogs by the fire stand up. And then it moves, a subtle twitch, a ripple in the golden dome. A hand reaches forward, slices open the crust, and boom. An explosion of feathers and flapping as several live birds erupt from the center of the pie. Yes, live. Trapped inside a hollow chamber under the crust, with enough air to breathe and just enough madness to make a scene. The ladies squeal, the men chuckle. The birds flap up toward the rafters and nest in the beams, where they will probably poop dramatically during dessert. You, like everyone else, are stunned and secretly delighted. 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. You thought it was just a rhyme, but here it is, flapping around your head in all its ridiculous pecking glory. Historians still argue whether these bird pies were a real tradition or more of a party trick for the ultra-rich. But there are at least 2 cookbooks from the late 14th century that explain how to make one. Bake the crust empty, carefully cut a hidden chamber into the base, insert birds or frogs or mice, yes, mice, and then seal it again with soft dough. It's part spectacle, part showmanship, and a generous splash of what modern foodies might call theater of dining. This is the medieval version of molecular gastronomy. Only instead of foam and nitrogen, you get pigeons. The pie's not even meant to be eaten. It's a course of delight, an edible prank. And don't worry, after the birds make their escape, a second, smaller pie is brought out. One you can actually chew without risking avian flu. You're handed a plate with a neat wedge of what smells like pigeon, prunes, and ginger. You dig in, cautiously. It's rich, dark, and heavily spiced. A bit sweet, a bit peppery. Not bad. Certainly better than the crusty fortresses back in the kitchen. Seated beside you is a clerk who's far too excited about bird pies. He leans over and whispers, "Last year, they put a small boy in the pie." You choke slightly. He nods with glee. "He popped out playing a flute." You're 80% sure he's exaggerating, but also only 80%. In the medieval mind, food and theater weren't separate. Meals were occasions. And pies? Pies were props. If you couldn't afford dancing bears or flame-throwing monks, yes, that happened, you made do with pastry. There are records, actual feast accounts, of pies with not just animals but performers inside. One banquet in France, circa 1450, describes a pie from which a dwarf dressed as a cherub emerged, offering candied almonds to guests while singing. Another event featured a cooked swan, served with its feathers reapplied, neck arched, beak gilded, and a candle stuck in its throat so it appeared to breathe fire. It's absurd. It's glorious. It's very medieval. As the hall settles again and the birds find perches, the servants clear the crust remains and bring out the next round. Smaller pies, bite-sized, filled with quince and ground lamb shaped like animals. One looks like a curled-up hedgehog, complete with almond slivers for spines. You can't help but smile. These pies aren't just for taste. They're for talk. Across the hall, a noblewoman picks at her food and mutters about a previous feast, where a pie exploded with live snakes. You sincerely hope that one's not true. The clerk beside you looks unsure. You know, he says, stabbing a bit of peacock meat with his knife, these things used to be about survival. Now, it's all for show. He's not wrong. Pies were once portable meals for farmers and soldiers, packed with whatever protein was on hand, sealed tight to keep out dirt and rats. But now, in this hall, they're centerpieces. Status symbols. You wonder if the kitchen's pastry chef, the one with the grumpy eyebrows and hands like cracked marble, feels proud or annoyed. Probably both. Behind you, the musicians start up again, a slow, sleepy melody that loops gently around the candlelight. You sip from your cup, warm wine spiced with cinnamon and cloves, a perfect echo of the pie filling, and glance at the long table of lords and ladies still laughing at the birds. And then you spot it, a pie being wheeled in at the far end, covered in a linen cloth. Everyone cranes their necks. This one's taller, more elegant. It's not moving, thankfully, but the air changes. This is the main event. The cloth is lifted, and underneath is an ornate pie shaped like a crown. Literally, a pastry crown, complete with golden sugar pearls and tiny glazed rubies of candied cherry. The crust is sculpted with flourishes and fluted edges, brushed until it glows like polished bronze. No birds, no tricks, just grandeur. It's a coronation pie made for the Lord's son, newly knighted and proudly posing for attention he barely earned. The pie is cut open, and inside is, believe it or not, venison and pears. A strange combo? Not for them. The pears cut through the richness of the meat, and the sauce has hints of saffron and rosewater. It smells divine. You get a slice, of course you do. You're important now, part of the pie crew. You take a bite, and for a moment, just a moment, as the spices melt on your tongue and the pastry crumbles just right. You forget about the flour in your hair, the heat of the ovens, the screaming about frogs. Just pie, just silence, just soft lute music in the distance. Then a bird poops in someone's goblet. Ah, medieval dining. Back in the kitchen, you're rinsing out a mixing bowl that's still sticky with fig paste when the next strange order comes in. Sweet pie, the head cook grunts. With meat. You pause. Did he say sweet meat pie? He did. And no, it's not a mistake. In fact, it's a classic. You've made pies with meat. You've made pies with fruit. But now you're making the kind that confidently shrugs and says, why not both? Because in the medieval mindset, the boundary between sweet and savory wasn't just blurry. It didn't exist. The idea of a sugary pork tart might make modern tongues twitch in confusion, but to your medieval palate, it's bold. Regal? Sometimes even romantic. This is the pie you bring to a banquet and a duel. Today's version starts with chopped pigeon breast. Yes, pigeon again. Mixed with chopped dates, raisins, boiled eggs, crushed almonds, parsley, and ginger. You stare at the pile, of ingredients, wondering if the cook is playing some elaborate joke. He's not. He starts talking while chopping. Helps the digestion, he mutters, referring to the ginger. Raisins for strength, almonds for richness. Pigeon 'cause it's Tuesday. You wonder if there's a pigeon schedule. You don't ask. You help him stir the mixture, watching as the sticky mass begins to glisten. Then he reaches for a small pot and spoons out something golden and strange. Marrow. Rendered from beef bones, it's soft, fatty, and prized in the medieval kitchen, like avocado toast at a Brooklyn brunch cafe. Historians still argue whether marrow was used purely for its taste or also for its supposed medicinal properties. According to old manuscripts, it gladdens the heart and nourishes the body. You take that to mean it's delicious and high calorie, which is basically all you need in an age where winter can kill you. As the cook folds the marrow into the filling, the aroma shifts. Savory, sure, but also oddly and warm. Like pie crossed with stew. You roll the crust, trying not to think too hard about how many pigeons were sacrificed for this dish. The dough is thinner this time, meant to be eaten along with the pie, not just serve as a protective casing. You line a tin mold with it, spoon in the sweet, salty filling, and top it with a lattice crust. It's not decorative. It's so the steam escapes and doesn't blow the pie apart like a floury grenade. As it bakes, you're handed another task. Make the sauce. This one's unusual. You begin with white wine and honey, add a few drops of rose water, a spoon of cinnamon, and wait, is that saffron again? It is. The good stuff. Threads of gold steeped in warm liquid, turning everything a glowing orange. You stir gently. It smells like the inside of a spice trader's dream. Or maybe a perfume bottle. It's hard to tell. This sauce will be served with the pigeon pie. You sip it from the spoon and blink. It's surprisingly elegant, like a syrupy glaze that hugs both the fruit and the bird. You ask the cook why the flavors are so mixed up. He just shrugs. Balance, Yaim, he says. Warm and cold. Sweet and strong, like life. That's kind of profound, actually, and not wrong. Medieval recipes often aimed for balance in the humoral sense. The belief was that everything you ate affected your internal humors. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The idea was to avoid tipping the scales too far in any direction. So, if your meat was hot and dry, you might pair it with fruit which was cold and moist to cancel it out. You glance around the kitchen, suddenly aware that this isn't just cooking, it's alchemy. Each dish is a spell to ward off imbalance, disease, or, let's be honest, bad dinner conversation. And then comes the true twist. The head cook adds a pinch of sugar to the meat sauce. Not a lot, just enough to round out the sharpness. You blink again. He notices. Sugar's not just for cakes, he says. You want the guest to go, that's unusual. Makes them feel important. You think about that while brushing the pie with egg yolk and sliding it into the oven. It is unusual, but in a good way. It's layered, unexpected. Like a lullaby with bagpipes. Or flirting with someone while discussing church tithes. Sweet and meat wasn't limited to pies either. There were recipes for lamb stews thickened with dates, sauces of vinegar and honey served with roasted chicken, and even cheese tarts topped with sugar and rose petals. The medieval cook was basically a chaos artist, throwing flavors into a cauldron and trusting that balance would prevail. One noblewoman famously served a dessert made from mashed peas, sweetened with honey and topped with candied almonds. Another made a pudding from rice, almond milk, and veal. It wasn't dessert or dinner, it was both. The oven door creaks open and a wave of warmth floods your face. You pull out the pigeon pie, its top golden and crisp, with little glints of marrow fat bubbling at the seams. It smells like a festival. Warm, earthy, sweet, and slightly wild. A celebration of contradictions. You slice it carefully and plate a piece for tasting. The crust gives with a gentle crackle. The filling steams rich with spice. You take a bite. It's tender. The pigeon melts like slow-roasted duck. The raisins pop with syrupy brightness. The ginger lingers. You're honestly stunned. It shouldn't work, but it does. You're so into it that you almost don't notice the kitchen boy sneaking a bite from the cooling rack. He winces. "Too spicy," he says, tongue sticking out. "Burns the back of my throat." The cook smirks. "That's the cinnamon. Warms the humors. You'll live." Maybe, maybe not. Because here's a fun little historical fact to chew on while your eyes start to flutter. Some medieval cooks were a little too heavy-handed with spices. Cinnamon, cloves, long pepper. They could be overpowering, especially when paired with wine-soaked meat. But they were also a status symbol. The more your dish burned, the more your guests knew you could afford the good stuff. It was a spicy flex. One Italian cookbook even recommended so much pepper that the guests cough upon first bite. Talk about a first impression. You lean back, pie still warm in your hands, and realize that tonight you've baked a contradiction. Something both bold and subtle, sweet and salty, soft and powerful, like a lullaby sung in a battlefield, like a pigeon, in a pie. You're scrubbing out a pan that's somehow stickier than medieval politics when a merchant bursts into the kitchen. Silks flapping, breath short, and hands full of treasure. Not gold, not jewels, sugar, lumps of it, hard and jagged like quartz, wrapped in linen and sweating in the heat. The cook doesn't even look up. "That the cypress loaf?" The merchant nods, wheezing. "Took a chunk off a cone near the harbor. Dockmaster was chewing on the profits again." You blink. Sugar, you're starting to realize, is less of a food and more of a currency in this world. Not that shiny white stuff from the modern supermarket. This sugar is dark, damp, and sticky, tan like sand and smelling faintly of molasses. It comes in giant cones called loaves, and to get even a handful, someone had to sail across seas, dodge pirates, bribe guards, and possibly survive scurvy. Also, someone in a velvet hat can sweeten their wine or decorate a pie. And you get to grate it by hand. The cook hands you a heavy metal rasp and points to the loaf. "Only what we need. No waste. That stuff's worth more than the bishop's horse." You scrape, watching as the crystals fall like brown snow into a bowl. It's slow work. Your arm aches. You're sweating in places you didn't know could sweat. Why all this trouble for something sweet? Because in the 14th century, sugar was not just food, it was power. Only the wealthiest nobles and religious leaders could afford to use it regularly. To serve a sugared dish at your feast wasn't just a treat, it was a message. Look what I control. Look what I own. And so the pies changed. What once held meat and onions now held almonds, rosewater, and sugar-glazed fruits. Sweet tarts rose in popularity. Quince and fig, pear and cheese, apple and spice, all laced with the good stuff. Not for nutrition, not even for pleasure, but for spectacle. You're handed a parchment recipe, the ink smudged and dotted with grease. It calls for pine nuts, soaked raisins, candied orange peel, and boiled wine thickened with sugar until it becomes syrupy. Then poured over baked apples and sprinkled with powdered ginger. You read it 3 times to be sure you're not hallucinating. Nope. That's the dish. You begin. While you slice apples with a knife that's definitely seen better centuries, the cook shares a story. Apparently, in Italy, a duke once hired artists to sculpt entire banquet centerpieces from sugar paste. Life-size animals, towers, even saints. Guests would admire them, and then eat them. He chuckles. Sweet holy martyr, now with extra almond. You're not sure if he's joking. He probably isn't. In England, nobles use sugar to sculpt subtleties, edible art pieces placed between courses. These weren't just decorations. They were conversation starters. One featured a sugar model of a knight fighting a dragon with the motto, "Virtue conquers desire." Another, A tiny sugar garden complete with birds, bees, and a fountain made from honey. Historians still argue whether these displays were meant to be eaten at all, or simply admired, applauded, and quietly left to collapse into sticky ruin. Your own sugar adventure doesn't involve dragons or fountains, just fruit and syrup. You stew the raisins in wine, add sugar, a splash of vinegar, and a whisper of clove. The kitchen fills with the smell of mulled spice and slow-baked sweetness. It's comforting in a way that makes your shoulders drop a little. And here's something you wouldn't expect. Some medieval doctors were suspicious of sugar. They called it hot and moist, dangerous if overused. Some claimed it caused melancholy or made the blood too thick. Others saw it as medicine, used in tonics or to coat pills. A few even wrote that sugar could clarify the mind. You try a spoonful of the syrup. Your mind does not feel clarified. Your teeth, however, feel slightly attacked. You pour the syrup over the apples, then arrange them into a crust lined with almond paste and dried figs. It's a rich dish. Heavy. Gilded. A pie that would bankrupt a peasant and impress a bishop. You brush the top with a bit of saffron glaze, because of course you do, and pop it into the oven. The heat swells and the scent shifts. It's no longer the smell of survival or hunger. It's the smell of indulgence, of luxury, of being seen. You think about that while wiping your hands. The medieval world was obsessed with showing rank. Everything, clothing, jewelry, even the way you cut your bread, was a signal. And sugar? That was the flashiest signal of all. In France, one noble family served a custard tart with so much sugar it formed a crystalline crust that guests had to tap with their knives to break. In Spain, royal cooks experimented with sugar to make marzipan sculptures of hunting dogs and horses. And in Byzantium, rumors claimed the emperor had a sugar dome built over a roast lamb, which cracked open when tapped, revealing steaming meat and a burst of rose petals. Of course, no one really needed all this sugar. That's the point. It wasn't necessity. It was performance. Every bite said, I have access. I have wealth. I have enough sugar to waste. You sit by the hearth, pie cooling in your lap, the sugar glaze catching the firelight. A crumb sticks to your finger and you lick it off. It tastes like roasted sun. And for a moment, you forget the blisters on your palms, the burn on your wrist, the flour still stuck in your eyebrows. You're just happy. The cook passes by, sees the glimmer on the crust, and nods. That, he says, is pie for people who've never known hunger. He doesn't say it with scorn, just a tired truth. You nod and tuck in. Morning in the kitchen smells like ash, old dough, and stewed herbs. You stretch your back, joints creaking like ancient hinges, and glance over at a tray of pies cooling on the windowsill. Sweet ones this time. You're hoping for a break from birds, bones, and sugar explosions. But the head cook has other plans. Off to the Abbey, he says, nodding toward the basket he's stuffing with wrapped parcels. They've been baking longer than you've been breathing. Time to learn from the brothers. You don't argue. A break from the manor kitchen sounds glorious. The Abbey is half a day's walk through damp fields and narrow paths. You carry your flour-smeared satchel, shoes caked in mud, breath steaming in the morning chill. The bell tower peeks through mist long before you arrive, and by the time the gates creak open, you're already catching a whiff of warm bread, thyme, and something sweet and strange. Inside, it's quieter than you're used to. No shouting, no crashing pans. Just the occasional chant echoing down the stone halls and the rhythmic sound of someone kneading dough with near-sacred focus. You're led to the bakehouse, a low, warm building with smoke rising from a thick chimney and shelves stacked with loaves and pastries. The monk in charge introduces himself with a serene smile and a handshake, strong enough to crush almonds. Brother Alric. He doesn't talk much, just nods toward a table and hands you a lump of dough the size of a small melon. You get the message, start working. Monastic baking is different, precise, patient, almost prayerful. You're used to noise and flower clouds, but here, every movement is intentional. The ingredients are humble: grain from the abbey fields, herbs from the cloister garden, honey collected from wooden hives buzzing just outside. But the results? Divine, literally. Today's bake is a honey tart layered with rosemary and fresh goat cheese. It sounds like a mistake. It's not. The tang of the cheese balances the sweetness of the honey, and the rosemary adds a sharp, piney note that lingers like incense. Brother Alric drizzles a line of syrup over the tart and mutters a Latin blessing under his breath. You're not sure if he's praying for flavor or protection. Either way, it smells fantastic. You help prepare another pastry. Almond paste folded into a dense crust, then wrapped around dried plums and brushed with wine. It's dense, earthy, and beautiful in a way that doesn't scream for attention. It just is. This is baking without ego. You ask Brother Alric why the monastery puts so much effort into sweets. He doesn't look up as he answers. Because joy is sacred too. You blink. That's unexpected and quietly revolutionary. Turns out monasteries weren't just centers of prayer, they were innovation hubs. Monks kept detailed recipe books, experimented with flavors, and preserved ancient knowledge from Greek and Roman sources. They recorded not just ingredients, but the seasons, the moon phases, even the prayers said during baking. They believed that food fed the soul as much as the body. Historians still argue whether monastic recipes were ever intended for the outside world, or were strictly internal, holy indulgences for the devout. But what's certain is this: monks knew their way around a pie. Brother Alric shows you a scroll written in delicate script. Dozens of sweet and savory recipes, some familiar, others wild. One is for a crust filled with figs, cinnamon, goat's milk, and crushed violets. Another uses black pepper and mint in a date tart. There's even one labeled Medicina Dulcis, a sweet medicine made of candied ginger and powdered licorice root. As you copy it down, he leans in and says, "That one'll fix your stomach after too much pigeon." You laugh, then stop. He's not joking. After the baking, the monks gather in the cloister garden to eat. It's simple fare: flatbread, fruit, cheese. But then they bring out the tart you helped make. It's sliced reverently and passed hand to hand like a sacrament. You chew slowly, the honeyed crust melting with rosemary warmth and a hint of thyme. There's silence. Not the awkward kind. The peaceful, satisfied kind. No one claps. No one boasts. Just quiet smiles and a second helping. You sit under a pear tree, sunlight dappling your arms, and feel something settle in your chest. A stillness. A kind of sweetness that has nothing to do with sugar. You think back to the manor kitchen, the chaos, the showmanship, the pies full of birds and blood and spice explosions. They were fun, wild, impressive. But this is what pie tastes like when it's made for grace, not glory. Later, as the sun begins to dip and you pack your satchel to leave, Brother Alric hands you a cloth-wrapped parcel. "For your cook," he says, "and for your quiet." You open it once you're out of sight. Inside is a single pastry, simple, round, filled with crushed almonds, honey, and dried lavender. The crust is golden but unglazed. No decoration, no feathers, just one small cross cut into the top. You take a bite. It's soft, fragrant, balanced, and somewhere in the background, a bell tolls slow and low, like a lullaby for bakers. The manor smells like onions again when you return. Someone spilled ale near the hearth. The dogs are fighting over a chicken bone, and your arms are sore from carrying that basket all the way back. But tucked inside, carefully wrapped in linen, is Brother Alric's pastry. The simple one with almonds and lavender. You've only taken a single bite. You're saving the rest. The head cook eyes the parcel, sniffs like a bloodhound, and grunts approvingly. "Monks bake like saints," he mutters. Then, without ceremony, he tosses you a bag of dried figs and a task. Tonight's feast needs something exotic. Something rare, something impressive. You stare at the figs. These aren't the plump, chewy things you're used to. They're shrunken, wrinkled, almost black. Imported from Italy or maybe further. The cook says nothing else, just jerks his thumb at the pantry. You shuffle in and freeze. There, laid out on a plank table like royal jewels, are bowls of ingredients you don't recognize. Dried fruits of all colors. Crystallized melon. Something that looks like dates but smells like lemon. And beside it all, a tray of what can only be described as fake fruit. Tiny apples molded from sugar paste. Pears carved from almond meal. Grapes made of painted marzipan, clustered around an actual vine. It's eerie and brilliant. You reach for one and nearly bite down until the cook thwacks your hand with a spoon. "They're not for eating," he snaps. "They're for seeing." This is your first introduction to table deception, a classic medieval move where the things on your plate are not what they seem. What looks like roast pork might be mashed nuts sculpted into a ham shape. What seems to be a fig might be a molded prune, spiced and sugared until it smells richer than anything from an orchard. Historians still argue whether this trickery started in noble courts or religious houses. Some say it was monks trying to entertain pilgrims with bread shaped like fish. Others claim it was noble chefs flexing their skills, showing they could fool the eyes and please the tongue all at once. Either way, it became an art. You begin your task, turning figs into jewels. First you boil them gently in red wine, adding sugar, cinnamon, and a dash of vinegar. As they soften, the smell fills the kitchen, a sweet tang of fruit and smoke. Then you drain and slice them open, stuffing each with almond paste, a sprinkle of pepper, and a sliver of preserved orange peel. Yes, pepper. In dessert. Again. You seal them shut, brush them with honey, and dust them with saffron sugar until they sparkle like amber. They're meant to be served as a final bite, a burst of rich sweetness after a salty, meat-heavy meal. Across the room, another apprentice is shaping marzipan into tiny fish, complete with licorice eyes and scales painted with crushed beetroot. Someone else is molding a fake egg, hollowing a real shell, filling it with sugared milk curd and resealing it with wax. It'll be served next to a real egg, and guests will be invited to guess which is which. It's ridiculous. It's magnificent. It's medieval dinner theater. You ask the cook why bother with all the disguise. Isn't it enough just to make good food? He smirks. Because the rich don't want food. They want wonder. He's not wrong. This isn't about flavor anymore. It's about control. About transforming nature. About showing that your chef can make a fish from sugar or turn milk into a swan. Back in the pantry, you find a mold shaped like a pear, carved from wood, polished smooth. You fill it with spiced almond paste, press it shut, and release a perfect pear replica into your hand. You color the top with saffron glaze, the bottom with a dab of spinach juice for green. Then you skewer a real pear stem into the top and dust the whole thing with fine sugar. You stand back. It looks real, too real. You place it next to a basket of actual pears and can barely tell the difference. That's the goal. There's an odd joy in the deception, in taking something ordinary and reshaping it until it dazzles. It's the same thrill a magician feels pulling coins from thin air. Only here, the magic is edible. A noblewoman once served guests a whole roast chicken made entirely of pressed rice, candied almonds, and dates. It smelled like meat. It sliced like meat. But it was sweet, soft, and vegetarian. Another served fish that were actually pears soaked in wine, their stems replaced with licorice tails. And then there was the infamous banquet where every dish was made to look like something else. Meat pies that were actually fruit tarts. Fruit tarts that were actually meat pies. custards shaped like eggs, eggs filled with fish paste. Guests laughed, then gagged, then laughed again. Your figs are ready now, glazed, stuffed, and slightly absurd. You arrange them on a silver plate, alternating with fake grapes, candied quince slices, and a single sugar-dusted plum that took you half an hour to sculpt. The head cook eyes your work, sniffs once, and surprised nods. "These'll shut 'em up," he says. That night, you get to sneak into the feast, hovering near the kitchen doors as the sweets are brought out. Nobles gasp. Someone asks if the pears were plucked from the manor orchard. Another dares a friend to bite one and loses a silver coin when it cracks like sugar glass. The room bursts into laughter. The jester even juggles 3 fake figs before accidentally biting one and chipping a tooth. You, hidden in the shadows, smile. It's a strange kind of pride. Not the kind you'd expect from a pastry, but then again, medieval food isn't really about expectations. It's about surprise. You've barely cleaned the last sugar mold when a summons arrives from the steward. "Big one tonight," he says. "For the young lord's crowning day, the kind of feast people whisper about for years." You're handed a rolled parchment sealed with wax. A recipe? A poem? Nope. It's an architectural diagram of a pie. You blink. This isn't food. It's a construction project. The blueprint shows a multi-layered behemoth. A pastry base the size of a small shield, layered with meat, fruit, spice, and because why not, a whole roast bird inside. And not just any bird. A peacock. Feathered, painted, crowned. You stare in silence. The cook grins without joy. "We start at dawn." And you do. The day begins with chopping. Dried cherries, dates, figs, chunks of venison, pears soaked in clove-spiced wine, minced herbs, shaved almonds, and so many egg yolks you begin to feel like you're living inside a giant omelet. The base crust is raised by hand, no mold, no dish, just brute strength and dough thick enough to support a cathedral. It's hot water crust, scalded into submission, then shaped like a drum. It holds its form like a fortress wall. As the others roll and fill layers, your task is the centerpiece. The peacock. The bird is already roasted, bones intact, head lifted high. Its neck is stiff, beak slightly open. It smells regal. The meat glistens, basted in saffron and butter. But it's the next step that leaves your modern mind spinning. They bring out a cloth bundle and unwrap its original feathers. Preserved. Brilliant. Iridescent blue and green with eyes that seem almost alive. With surgical precision, the cook redresses the roasted bird in its plumage, pinning the skin to the meat like a bizarre taxidermy meets catering project. It looks like it could strut off the table at any moment and demand better wine. Then he gilds the beak with gold leaf and places a tiny sugar crown atop the bird's head. It's not a meal, it's a statement. Medieval lords didn't just eat to survive, they feasted to proclaim. A peacock in a pie was more than luxury. It was pageantry. Dominance. Proof that you had power over nature, resources, and your own mortality. Historians still argue whether these pies were truly eaten or mostly admired. Some suggest the birds were brought in just for show, replaced later by simpler fare. Others say the meat was divided up and given to favored guests or even the poor, as a twisted act of noblesse oblige. But in this hall, it will be served. You lower the peacock gently into the crust's final layer, nestling it among sweetened rice and egg custard. The head peeks through a pastry arch as if the bird is emerging from a palace gate. You brush the crust with egg yolk, decorate it with carved roses and pastry chains, and sprinkle it all with crushed rock sugar. Then you pray it doesn't collapse. It's baked in stages, rotating between ovens. Your arms ache from lifting, your eyes burn from the smoke. But when the final round ends and the pie is lifted, carefully, reverently, it holds. Barely. You step back and look at your work. It's absurd. It's glorious. It's medieval Michelin star madness. The pie is escorted into the great hall by 4 servants with arms like tree trunks. Musicians play a slow, dramatic tune. The nobles fall silent. Even the jester shuts up. The pie is placed on the Lord's table. A moment passes. Then slowly the steward cuts open the crust, revealing the layers of meat, fruit, and the royal bird, still standing like some pastry phoenix reborn. The hall erupts. Applause. Shouts. Goblets slam to tables. One knight wipes away a tear. A scribe nearby sketches the scene for future bragging. A minstrel composes a short song on the spot, rhyming peacock with shock and the cock of the clock. It's terrible. It doesn't matter. You watch from behind the door, and in that moment you realize this isn't just food. This is ceremony. It's not just about taste, it's about spectacle, ritual, memory. The medieval feast is a theater of identity. The dishes declare lineage, wealth, even politics. One lord served a pie containing symbols of each of his estates. Lamb for the hills, fish for the riverlands, honey for the beekeepers. Another inserted written poems into hollowed crust to be discovered by romantic guests. And once in France, a noble family served a pie with a live child inside. Yes, a child. He popped out, recited a poem, and then was put back inside for dessert. You're 90% sure that one's exaggerated, but not completely. Back in the kitchen, the head cook lifts his mug in salute. To pies that shake the world, he says. You clink your cup. And in your hands? A tiny leftover pastry, almond, orange zest, saffron glaze. You take a bite. It's quiet here, away from the fanfare. But you helped build the magic. One crust at a time. The feast is over, and the kitchen is, briefly, still. Pans lean against walls like exhausted soldiers. The hearth glows low and red, and someone has fallen asleep on a sack of flour. You don't blame them, but there's no rest for the flour-streaked. The head cook waves you over and plops a bundle of scrolls on the table. Next, he says simply, you unroll the parchment. At first it looks like a strange poem, half recipe, half riddle. But then you realize it's not just a recipe, it's a puzzle, a kitchen trick, a game of flavors, colors, and construction. Tonight you're diving into the weirdest corner of medieval baking, pastry as performance. Think edible mazes, pies that open like boxes, cakes with secrets inside. It's culinary alchemy, and you're now an apprentice wizard. The cook picks one design. A coffin pie that once cut reveals 3 different fillings in separate chambers. Each compartment is hidden beneath a layer of dough and sealed like treasure. One holds minced mutton with sage and cloves. Another custard with rosewater and saffron. The third? Dried apple and smoked eel. Yes, eel. You flinch. The cook just shrugs. It's all about surprise. The crust must be thick enough to support the weight, but not so thick it can't be cut cleanly. You work slowly, building walls inside the pie like rooms in a house. A pastry fortress. Each section marked with a different decoration. 1 rose, 1 leaf, 1 twisted rope. The top goes on last, and you cut small vents shaped like stars. Not for style, okay, also for style, but mostly to let the fillings breathe during baking. Otherwise, one good puff of steam could turn your pastry masterpiece into a floury bomb. While it bakes, you explore some of the other kitchen secrets. The assistant baker is assembling a pie in the shape of a fish. Not with fish, as a fish. The crust is sculpted with scales, the mouth slightly open. Inside, a mix of almond paste and dates, dyed pink with beetroot. When served, the head will crack open to reveal a small sugar pearl. Another apprentice is carving a crust lid into the shape of a castle gate. It'll go on a meat pie with layers stacked like tower floors. Game birds, dried fruit, crushed hazelnuts, and tiny boiled quail eggs. Each bite will tell a story. A bite-sized medieval mystery. You're learning something crucial here. Medieval food wasn't just nourishment, it was narrative. And the pies? They were plot twists in crust. One of the older cooks leans in and tells you about a banquet where a lord served pies filled with painted sugar bees. When opened, the bees swarmed. Tiny pieces of paper folded to spring upward, painted gold and black. It caused a mild panic and a standing ovation. Another tale? A pie that opened to reveal a hollow shell filled with spices and rose petals. As the lid lifted, warm air released the scent, and guests swore the pie had sung to them. Was it a trick of the wine? Maybe, but a clever one. Historians still argue whether these musical pies were real or myth. Some recipes suggest stringing thin wire across the pie's interior, so that when it's opened, tension causes the wires to hum. Others think it was the sizzle of spices on hot fillings that created sound. No one knows for sure, but the legend lives on. Your triple chamber pie is done. You lift it with care. It's heavy, golden, and smells like a fever dream. You slice it open under the cook's watchful eye. It holds 3 perfect wedges. Meat, custard, eel apple surprise? You can't help but grin. The cook just mutters, "Don't serve the eel first," and moves on. Later that night, you get to watch the guests react. The pie is brought to the table. The steward cuts through it like he's opening a treasure chest. First, the meat. Predictable? Safe? They nod, approving. Second, the custard. A pleasant surprise. Spoons appear, smiles follow. Third, the eel. There's a moment of silence. Then a noblewoman blinks, tastes it, and shockingly nods. "Unexpected," she says, "but clever." Someone claps. You've won the medieval dinner lottery. Back in the kitchen, you're asked to prep another surprise for tomorrow. A pie filled with tiny sugar mice. Edible, of course, but shaped to scamper when the lid is removed. You're told to make sure at least one looks like it's winking. You're not even fazed anymore. Because here's the thing. In this world, the kitchen is the stage. The pastry, the performance, the pie crust, that's your curtain. And you? You're not just a baker, you're a storyteller. With flour in your ears and a grin on your face, you start kneading the dough again. This time for a pie shaped like a lute, filled with spiced pears, walnuts, and honey. The strings will be candied lemon peel. If you pluck one just right, it might even twang. Sweet dreams indeed. You've barely wiped the flour from your fingernails when the kitchen door creaks open, and in walks a man with a feather in his hat, and an expression that says, "I'm here to complicate everything." He carries a wax-sealed scroll, a heavy purse, and an attitude that makes you instinctively hide the sugar. "Guild business," he announces, dropping the scroll on the work table with a thud. "Inspection day." You've heard whispers about them, the Bakers Guild. They control everything: flour standards, spice measurements, oven sizes, even pie height in some towns. Mess with the rules, and you don't just lose your kitchen. You could be fined, banned, or, in rare cases, publicly shamed. There's a rumor about a cook forced to wear a giant pie crust around his neck for a week. You pray it's just legend. The cook greets the guild official with forced cheer and gestures toward your station. You suddenly become very interested in aligning your pear slices exactly. The inspector strolls the kitchen like a bored king, occasionally sniffing, tapping crusts, and lifting lids. He tastes your quince tart, chews, then scribbles a note on a tiny piece of parchment with a stubby ink pen. He doesn't look impressed, or angry, just neutral. You survive the inspection, but not without learning that in medieval kitchens, baking wasn't just about flavor, it was about compliance. And secrecy. The guilds kept tight control over trade secrets. Recipes weren't shared freely. They were guarded like battle plans. Apprentice bakers had to train for years, memorize dozens of spice ratios, and pass tests before earning the right to call themselves master of pies. And heaven help you if you shared a guild recipe with someone outside the city. Historians still argue whether these guild rules helped preserve quality or just stifled innovation. But one thing's clear: if your crust cracked, your shop could close. It was that serious. After the inspector leaves, with the tart tucked mysteriously into his sleeve, the kitchen relaxes. Sort of. The cook sighs. He docked us points for uneven almond grind. You glance at the mortar and pestle. You'd smash those almonds for 40 minutes. Still, you're learning the ropes. Today's challenge is a pie with a hidden message. Not metaphorical, literal. The lady of the house wants to send a secret to her sister, one that, should it be intercepted, will look like nothing more than a tasty treat. So, into the crust it goes. You carefully roll a small piece of parchment, seal it in wax, and slip it into a hollow beneath the upper crust, between the layers of sugared apple and cinnamon. If no one knows to look for it, they'll just think it's a clump of fruit. This isn't uncommon. Medieval kitchens were full of secrets. Not just love notes, but smuggled coins, charms, even tiny relics. One legend tells of a baker who helped a prisoner escape by hiding a rolled map inside a bread loaf. Another features a pie crust containing a bone carved with a saint's blessing, meant to protect a newborn. There's even a pie referenced in an old letter from an English nobleman to his cook, demanding that the crust not crack, lest the seal be known. No one knows what it was sealing, but that's the point. You finish sealing the message pie and brush the top with egg yolk, tinted with saffron. It looks just like any other tart. You'd never know it contained a secret. The cook pulls you aside. Some pies, he says quietly, aren't meant to be eaten. They're meant to be delivered. You nod, and file that under. Things they don't teach you when you're just trying to make dessert. The rest of the day you work on more standard pies. A mutton and leek one for the stable hands, a mushroom and onion for the scribe, and one strange experiment with trout, honey, and dill that makes your nose feel betrayed. In between, the cook shares a story. Apparently, years ago, the Bakers Guild had a scandal. One of their own sold a spice blend to a foreign cook. Something secret, sacred, known only to master bakers. The result? A pie at court that tasted too good. They found the source, banned the cook, burned every scroll he'd touched. Some say his spice blend still circulates in black markets. Others say it's lost forever. The cook winks. Or maybe, he says, tapping the spice rack, we're using it right now. You can't tell if he's joking, which seems to be the point. Guild baking, you realize, is a game of layers, not just in the pies, but in everything. Rules, secrets, symbols. Even the shape of the pie could send a message. A round pie? Traditional. Square? For special holy days. Heart-shaped? Obvious. One nobleman even served a spiral-shaped crust filled with alternating layers of meat and fruit. His not-so-subtle way of saying he was a complex man with many appetites. You're beginning to understand baking in this world is both craft and code. And you're starting to speak the language. Late that night, after the fires burn low and the kitchen is almost quiet, you unwrap Brother Alric's lavender pastry from your satchel. You'd saved the last bite all day. You take it now, slowly. It tastes of almond and warmth, of quiet secrets and patience, of honeyed silence folded into soft crust. And for the first time in days, you close your eyes and the pie doesn't shout. It whispers. You wake to the sound of laughter, sharp, chaotic, echoing up from the lower courtyard. When you peer out the kitchen's side window, you see where it's coming from. The street market. It's market day, and the stalls have sprouted overnight like mushrooms after rain. Canvas awnings flap in the breeze. Bakers, brewers, butchers, and barbers, all shouting over each other in a kind of musical chaos. And near the far corner, beyond the onions and over the fishmonger's cart, a small cluster of children are fighting over something sticky and shining in the sun. Sweet pies, but not the kind you've spent days perfecting in the Lord's kitchens. No, these are street pies, hand-sized, warm, sloppily crimped, often burnt, and, let's be honest, slightly Suze. You grab your cloak and a coin or two and slip out the back door. The first stall you pass is advertising hot plum pasties, only 1 farthing. The sign is crooked. The pastry is not hot. The filling is not plum. The vendor grins anyway. You buy one. It's chewy, mostly crust, slightly sweet, something gritty. Almonds, the vendor says proudly. You squint. Almonds taste suspiciously like sawdust soaked in honey, but he's already moved on, yelling at a boy trying to pocket a tart under his shirt. You wander further, tasting your way through the underbelly of medieval dessert culture. It's delightful. It's horrifying. It's honest. One vendor is selling fig tarts with only 3 weevils per dozen. Another claims his pies are filled with actual fruit, and you believe him, mostly because one has what might be a pear stem sticking out of the top. You pass a cart with a woman selling something called sugar flake. Basically hardened honey spun into delicate shapes, dusted with flour to keep from sticking. Kids are fighting over it. One is crying, another is licking it off his sleeve. You realize something as you chew a lopsided pastry that tastes faintly of thyme and something sour. This is where the magic meets the masses, because not everyone eats in great halls. Not everyone gets pies sculpted into castles or filled with peacocks and moral metaphors. For most people, this is pie. Simple, sweet, slightly dodgy, maybe made with yesterday's bread soaked in syrup and mashed into a crust. Maybe baked in the ashes because there's no proper oven, but it's theirs. Historians still argue whether these street sweets came from noble recipes trickled down, or if the courtly chefs stole their ideas from the markets. Some even suggest that the real innovations started here, among the cart pushers and corner shouters, not behind palace walls. You believe it. The smells are intoxicating. Burnt sugar, wood smoke, fermented cider, berries cooked to jam. Someone nearby is frying dough in fat and dipping it in wine. Instant dessert, they call it. You try one. It's brilliant. Crisp on the outside, soft in the middle with a heat that lingers in your chest. You ask what it's called. The vendor shrugs. Stomach hug. Perfect. But not everything here is innocent. You spot a stall labeled Royal Tarts as served to the Duke himself. The vendor winks and opens a basket to reveal grayish pies that look like they've seen better decades. You know these weren't served to any duke. Maybe not even to a particularly hungry goat. The vendor hisses, "Imported saffron inside, I swear." You point out the complete absence of color. He switches tactics. "Nutmeg, exotic." You bite. It's cabbage. You glance around. Street pies come with their own rules. Some are genuinely clever, like a boy who's made fake fruit pies filled with mashed lentils, sugar, and orange peel. They're shockingly good and cheap. Another sells rose cakes made with wildflower syrup and barley flour, shaped into hearts and painted with beetroot juice. But for every honest treat, there's a dozen scams. One woman's almond tart is made from crushed bean paste and lard. Another's apple pie tastes aggressively like turnips. You hear an old joke from a passing merchant. What's the difference between a market pie and a lie? One costs a penny, the other's free. Still, there's energy here. Children begging for scraps, dogs prowling under carts for crumbs, sweet-faced girls singing ditties while selling fig turnovers. A blind man playing a fiddle, his cup full of sugared walnuts people have tossed in instead of coins. And everywhere, the smell of pies. Not elegant, not precise, but alive. Back at the manor, you tell the cook about your market adventure. He snorts. "Sawdust and lies," he says. You nod. But you add, "Some were surprising." He grumbles, then relents. "Some of the best recipes started down there. Someone just had to steal them and add saffron." He's not wrong. One of the court's most beloved desserts, poor man's tart, started as a way to use stale bread. Mixed with honey, apples, and crushed nuts, it became a noble favorite once someone added orange peel and declared it foreign. Now it's served in gold-rimmed dishes with rosewater on the side. That's the thing about food. It travels. It evolves. It pretends to be fancy. It pretends to be poor. It pretends. And in the end, it just wants to be eaten. You unwrap one last street tart from your cloak pocket. Sticky. Sweet. Probably illegal. You take a bite. It's mostly cinnamon. Maybe a little rad. You smile anyway. Because in the medieval market of sweets and schemes, sometimes a warm crust and a lie is all you need. The next morning is quiet. Too quiet. Which, in kitchen terms, means something terrifying is about to happen. You're scrubbing out yesterday's pie tins when the head cook strolls in. Humming. A sure sign of mischief. He casually drops a bundle of dried herbs on your table and says, "Tonight we're baking for love." You pause mid-scrub. He gives you a look. Don't pretend you've never heard of love pies. You have. But you thought they were mostly myths, sweet fictions whispered by kitchen maids, or tales the old scullion used to mutter before falling asleep in the pantry. Pies that make people fall in love, or fall into bed, or fall under some influence. And now, apparently, you're making one. You glance at the herbs: nutmeg, basil, violets, fennel, mint, some dried rose petals, a tiny bag of crushed almonds, and wait, is that saffron and cinnamon? The cook confirms with a smirk. And just a touch of ginger. Always ginger. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. Because you're about to enter the sugary, slippery, semi-superstitious world of culinary seduction. In medieval Europe, food wasn't just about nourishment. It was medicine, charm, and yes, spell work. The boundaries between recipe and ritual were paper thin. And pies? They were the perfect vessel. You start with a basic crust. Rich, buttery, flaky this time, because nothing says romance like soft edges. Into it goes a mix of apples, rosewater, almonds, honey, and a sprinkle of nearly everything on the table. But you're not just seasoning for flavor. You're seasoning for effect. See, nutmeg was believed to stir desire. Basil encouraged sympathy and attraction. Ginger warmed the blood. Rose petals softened the heart. Violets inspired dreams. And cinnamon? Cinnamon lit a fire in the belly and made people say yes when they meant maybe. Historians still argue whether these associations came from ancient Greek medicine, Arabic texts, or sheer coincidence. But in any case, the idea stuck. Food could charm. There's even a 14th century French guide to courtly love that recommends specific desserts before writing poetry. One recipe includes figs, almond paste, and a shot of honeyed wine. Just enough to make the tongue loosen and the knees wobble. You fold the filling gently, being careful not to bruise the violets. The scent is floral, sweet, and just a little dangerous. You add a bit of grated ginger, then pause, unsure. The cook nods. Go on, a little more. You want her to remember him? Her? Oh, so this pie has a target. He doesn't say who, but you get the feeling it's a quiet matchmaking effort. Perhaps the lady's maid and the stable hand? Or two merchants dancing awkwardly around each other over wine deliveries. Whoever it is, the cook's hoping the pie does what words couldn't. You brush the crust with egg yolk and etch a delicate pattern of vines and hearts along the edge. Not too obvious, just suggestive enough. While it bakes, the kitchen fills with whispers. Someone tells the story of a widow who once slipped cinnamon and powdered cherry pits into a gooseberry tart and delivered it to the captain of the guard. They were married 2 weeks later. Or maybe he just liked gooseberries, but still. Another swears that in Florence a young scribe baked a fig pie with so much fennel his crush fainted at the first bite. Not from love, from an allergic reaction, but they did end up together in the infirmary for a week, which was apparently romantic enough. Not all stories end well. One tale tells of a jealous noblewoman who made a love pie with cloves, mint, and a drop of her own blood. It worked, briefly. Then the man ran off with her cousin, and the noblewoman was last seen tossing pies off the castle wall like frisbees of heartbreak. There's a lesson there. Probably don't put blood in your pie. The smell from the oven is heady now. You open the door and breathe it in. Sugar, spice, something floral, something wild. The crust is golden, the edges just beginning to caramelize. You pull it out carefully, half expecting the air to shimmer with aphrodisiac magic. It doesn't, but it does make your pulse slow. Your breath deepen. The cook slices a corner and hands you a piece. Taste it. Tell me if it smiles. You take a bite. And okay, it smiles. It's not just good, it's elegant, gentle, confident. The flavors linger like a compliment whispered at a feast. A bit of warmth at the end from the ginger, a cooling kiss of mint. You look at the slice and think, yeah, someone's gonna fall in love over this. The cook wraps the rest in linen and seals it with a sprig of rosemary. He won't say who it's for. You won't ask. Later that night, you pass by the lower courtyard and see two figures sitting on a bench, sharing a single slice of pie. They're laughing, softly. One brushes flour from the other's sleeve. It's not fireworks, it's just quiet. Sweet, like a promise. And you? You walk back to the kitchen grinning. Because some pies feed the body, some feed the soul. And some just open the door a little wider. You're cleaning out the spice cupboard, again, when someone mentions the old woman at the edge of the village. Careful, the stable boy whispers, eyes wide. Her pies know things. You raise an eyebrow. The kitchen witch, the scullery maid adds, like she's sharing state secrets. Lives past the orchard. Bakes with herbs no one names. Talks to dough. Sells charm pies to women who want their husbands to behave. You wait for the punchline. None comes. Instead, the cook, who laughs at everything, just nods slowly and says, "She taught me how to stop crusts from cracking." You blink. Wait. She's real? He smirks. Real as burnt custard. Well then, next thing you know, you're carrying a warm bundle of spice cake down a muddy path lined with blackthorn and mushrooms, heart pounding like you're delivering tribute to a dragon. Her cottage is unexpected. Not spooky, not ominous, just old. Cozy, low roof, herbs hanging from the beams. A cat perched in the windowsill, judging you with ancient disdain. The door creaks open before you knock. She's shorter than you imagined, wrinkled but sharp-eyed. Apron dusted in flour, hands still sticky with dough. She wipes them on her skirt and takes the bundle without a word. Then she gestures you inside. The air smells like lavender, dried apple, and a hint of something else. Maybe fennel, maybe secrets. You step in. The room is filled with books, not fancy ones, not the gold-leafed tomes of the monastery. These are well-worn, hand-bound, stuffed with loose parchment and handwritten notes. Recipes, clearly, but more than that. Observations, diagrams, scribbles in margins. You spot one labeled, "Crusts that Breathe." Another, "Pies for Crossing Thresholds." She moves like a shadow through her kitchen, tossing herbs into a pot, folding dough without looking. She doesn't speak until she offers you tea. Chamomile, sweetened with honey. It tastes like summer and rain. She finally asks what you want. You hesitate, then blurt, "Why do some pies feel different?" Even when the recipe's the same. She gives you a look that says, "Finally a decent question." And then she answers. "In the old days," she begins, "we didn't separate kitchen from magic. You stirred sunwise to draw in blessings. You salted with the left hand to ward off grief. You spoke softly while folding dough so your anger wouldn't toughen the crust." You stare. She shrugs. "Doesn't mean the pie can cast spells. Just means you do." She shows you one of her recipes. It's half instructions, half poem. If you bake for sorrow, crush the rosemary dry. But if it's love you seek, wet it with tears. You ask if she invented it. She grins. Number pie told me. Right. She shows you her pie molds, wooden carvings with intricate symbols. One has a heart wrapped in vines, another a snake biting its own tail. She explains, symbols matter. Pies feed the eye, the belly, the soul. What you press into them leaves an impression. She pulls a pie from her oven, simple crust, steam curling up like incense. She slices it open, honey, thyme, chopped walnuts, and rose petals. You take a bite. It's soft, unfussy, gentle in a way you didn't know pastry could be. And somewhere between the sweetness and the floral warmth, you feel something open inside you. Not magic, not quite, but close. She watches, expression unreadable. Now, she says, you're ready to bake your own story. You nod, still chewing. Before you leave, she hands you a folded note. For your next pie. You don't open it until you're halfway back to the manor. Inside, a list of ingredients, some familiar, some strange. And one final line, written in shaky but deliberate script. Historians still argue whether I'm a fraud or a genius. That's how you know I'm doing it right. You tuck it into your satchel. Back in the manor kitchen, you look at the dough differently. Not just as food, as potential. You add herbs with care, fold slowly, press a tiny spiral into the edge with the back of your spoon. And as the pie bakes, it doesn't just smell good. It feels like it's listening. You're dusting sugar over a tray of warm tarts when the steward barges in, breathless, red-faced, and carrying what looks like an armful of candlesticks in panic. It's the ambassador, he gasps. From Aragon. He's coming tonight. The hall must dazzle, the meal must whisper of power, and the dessert must... He pauses dramatically. Melt. You wait for clarification. Melt, you ask? Melt, he says again, with full eye contact. The cook groans. Ah, a sugar banquet. You nearly drop the sugar tin. You've heard of them. Sugar banquets. Those over-the-top edible performances where everything on the table is made from sugar, or shaped to look like it is. Sculptures, creatures, castles, candlesticks. Entire dioramas of battles or love scenes, all painstakingly molded and painted. You thought they were myths. They are not. You're told to clear the kitchen, because now you're not just baking, you're sculpting. The cook unlocks a small chest hidden beneath the spice shelf. Inside is a precious hoard of sugar cones, thick, slightly damp, dark as amber. There's also a collection of molds, brushes, crushed pigments, and wine? For painting? Possibly drinking? You're given a task. Create a bird. But not just any bird. A swan. Made entirely of sugar paste. You blink. Soft or hard? You ask. The cook chuckles darkly. Hard enough to hold its neck. Soft enough to shatter when tapped. Like diplomacy. You boil the sugar, slowly mixing it with water, gum arabic, and lemon juice. You stir carefully, knowing that one wrong move will turn your delicate sculpting medium into either syrup or glass. Then comes the molding. You press the warm paste into a carved mold of feathers, smoothing the edges with wet fingers. The wings are delicate. The neck is stubborn. You use a small spoon handle to curve it just so. When you unmold the full figure and let it rest, it's already magnificent. Pale, shining, elegant. The cook paints its beak with egg yolk mixed with saffron. Its eyes? Clove buds. Historians still argue whether sugar banquets were ever meant to be eaten, or if they were more like edible propaganda. You understand now. They weren't about taste. They were about awe, and sometimes about breaking that awe deliberately. In some banquets, the host would let guests admire the sugar statues for hours, then smash them mid-feast to gasps and cheers. A symbolic gesture. Look what I can build. Look what I can destroy. You help build a sugar tower shaped like a cathedral. You glue the arches together with molten syrup. You dust the roof with fine ground rice flour to mimic snow. It stands, just barely, until someone breathes too hard and the top wobbles. You reinforce it with cinnamon sticks. Across the room, another apprentice is molding marzipan animals. Lions, elephants, even a tiny griffin. They'll be arranged in a Garden of Wonders scene for the table centerpiece. Each one is painted with juice dyes: beetroot red, spinach green, saffron gold. The cook is assembling a sugar fountain. Yes, a fountain. He hollows out a sugar cone, fits a tube through the center, and fills it with honeyed wine. When served, he'll tilt the base and let the liquid drip from the carved mouth of a lion's head. The room will gasp. You will silently weep. Even the platters are part of the trick. Large sugar tiles painted with checkerboard patterns to look like expensive marble. Guests will think they're eating off gold inlaid wood. But if they tap too hard, crack. Everything here is designed to deceive, to delight, to dazzle, and then disappear. Because that's the most powerful part of a sugar banquet. It vanishes. By the end of the night, the guests will have licked the lions, snapped the swan necks, shattered the fountain, and chewed the cathedral windows. No leftovers, no history, just memory. And maybe a stomachache. Your swan is ready. You place it gently on a platter of sugar waves, molded from curled shards. It looks like it's gliding. You almost don't want to hand it over. The cook sees your face. He pats your shoulder. Everything sweet dies, he says. But if they remember how it felt, you did it right. The banquet is held under candlelight. The ambassador is seated directly in front of your swan. You watch from the shadows as he leans in, eyes wide, lips parted. Then he gently touches the neck with his spoon. Crack. The swan collapses. Everyone gasps. He tastes the shard, he smiles. You exhale. Later, a page delivers a note to the kitchen. 3 words in careful Aragonese script. The swan sang. You grin. And go back to stirring sugar. The festival fires have died down. The great hall is littered with crumbs, broken crusts, and laughter echoing off stone walls. Someone's still snoring under the table. A half-melted sugar griffin sits headless on a pewter platter. Its wings devoured by diplomats and its tail missing entirely. Probably taken home as a souvenir. And you're still in the kitchen. It's quiet now. Just the soft hiss of coals, the clink of a spoon, and your own heartbeat slowing after weeks of chaos. The last pie has been served, the final tart tasted, the sugar fountain drained dry. And somehow, it's not relief you feel, it's nostalgia. You kneel beside the hearth and rake a few glowing embers into a tight pile. Just enough to bake one last pie. No orders, no ambassadors, no love potions or puppet shows or peacocks in disguise. Just you. You reach for what's left. 2 withered apples, a fistful of crushed almonds, the dregs of a honey pot, a dusting of cinnamon, and half a sheet of pastry dough that someone forgot to cover. It's dry. Cracks at the edges. You wet your fingers, work it back to life. Slowly. Gently. This pie won't dazzle anyone. But it will be yours. You fold in what you've learned. A touch of ginger for warmth. Almonds for memory. Honey for sweetness. Cinnamon for the way it lingers, long after everything else fades. You score the top with a spiral, like the kitchen witch taught you. Press the edges with your thumb. Whisper something soft, not even sure what. It's not magic, but it feels like it. You slide it into the embers. Not a proper oven, just heat and trust. As it bakes, you sit on the hearthstone, letting your thoughts drift like rising steam. You remember the moment your crust held and didn't collapse. The first bite that made someone smile. The boy who proposed after eating your ginger tart. The woman who wept over a sugared fig because it reminded her of her mother. The swan that cracked like music. You remember laughter, panic, burned crusts, near disasters, miracles. You remember stories. Because in the end, that's what medieval pastry was. A story you could eat. A moment made real. A memory sealed in flour and fat and fire. The crust darkens. The air fills with that soft, sleepy scent of cooked apples and sugar. The kind of smell that wraps around your ribs and whispers, everything's okay. Lie down. Rest now. You pull the pie from the ashes. Its edges are uneven. The filling has leaked slightly. The crust is burnt in one corner. It is perfect. You sit cross-legged alone in the flickering glow and take a bite. Still warm. Software. Gentle spice. Not too sweet, not too proud. Just enough. You lean back against the hearth wall. Let your shoulders drop. Let your thoughts go quiet. And you think, maybe this is what pie was always meant to be. Not a performance, not a puzzle, not a prize, but a presence. A small warmth at the end of the day. A hand on your back. A breath before sleep. And now, as the last crumbs cool on the plate and the embers settle into silence, you feel the weight of the day easing off your shoulders like an old cloak. Outside, the stars are blinking into place, one by one, behind the tower roofs and chimney smoke. The world has gone soft. Even the dogs have stopped barking. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls, then silence again. You close your eyes. The kitchen around you fades, not because it's gone, but because it's safe. The flour-dusted table, the spoon still resting on the edge of the bowl, the empty tart shell forgotten in the corner. All of it holds you now, like memory wrapping you in dough. The air smells faintly of cloves. Your breath slows. The stories swirl gently in your mind. The pies with birds. The crust carved with secrets. The sweets that melted under candlelight and left only laughter behind. They're drifting now, like steam curling up toward the beams, carrying whispers from centuries ago. Everything has softened. The fire, the edges, the need to do anything else. You're warm, full, not just in your belly, but in that quiet part of you that loves when things are simple and kind and still. There's nothing else to do tonight, nothing left to prove. You've made it through the feast. The crust held, the filling sang, and now you rest. Sleep well, baker. The pies will wait.